Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku could copy any quirk, but only for 10 seconds at a time. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world, for Izuku Midoriya, had always been a grand and dazzling stage. On it, titans clashed in symphonies of destruction and salvation, their powers painting the skyline with chaos and hope. He was, and had always been, a member of the audience, a boy in the front row perhaps, but firmly on the other side of the velvet rope. His place was in the crowd, notebook in hand, pen scratching furiously across the page as he dissected the performance with the obsessive precision of a critic who desperately wished he were an actor. Today's performance was a matinee showing in the heart of the city. Kamui Woods, the dashing and popular rookie, was the star. His body, a lattice of living wood, elegantly extended to ensnare a purse snatcher who had inexplicably mutated into a hulking, giggling monstrosity. Illegal use of powers during rush hour and robbery resulting in bodily harm. Kamui announced, his voice amplified by his mask. You are the incarnation of evil. He coiled a woody limb, preparing his signature move. Take this. My preemptive. Lacquered chain prison. Izuku's muttering was a low hum beneath the roar of the crowd. A frantic, desperate percussion to the opera of the fight. He's going for the capture move. It's super effective against large, slow-moving targets with limited range capability. The wood is strong, but a strength-type quirk of sufficient power could break it. It's a good choice here, though, minimizes property damage and, before he could finish his thought or Kamui could finish his attack, a new actor burst onto the stage. Canyon Cannon! The cry was followed by the appearance of a woman the size of a two-story building. Empty Lady, in all her glory, delivered a devastating kick that sent the villain spiraling into a billboard, unconscious. She landed with a theatrical pose, winking at the assembled press cameras that had materialized as if from thin air. Izuku blinked, his pen frozen over the page. He clicked it twice, then began a new entry. Empty Lady. Quirk, gigantification. Incredible power and crowd appeal, but her sheer size makes her almost useless in confined spaces. The collateral damage could be a major issue. She essentially stole the spotlight from Kamui Woods, which shows a keen understanding of media presence, a vital skill for a modern hero. He was so absorbed he didn't notice the man next to him leaning over. Talking notes? You want to be a hero too, huh, kid? Izuku looked up, a brilliant, guileless smile spreading across his face. Yes. More than anything, it was the truth. The only truth that mattered. It was a fire that had burned in his chest since he was 4 years old, watching the grainy footage of All Might saving 100 people from a burning building, a radiant smile on his face. That was the moment the dream was born, and it was at the Quirk doctor's office, a sterile room that smelled of antiseptic and shattered hopes, that the dream had been given a death sentence. You should probably give it up, the doctor had said, his tone casual, as if he were discussing the weather. He pointed a pen at an X-ray of Izuku's foot, a glowing image of his own personal failure. You see this extra joint in his pinky toe? Research has shown that humans have evolved to no longer need it. In this day and age, those with quirks have only one joint. Since Izuku has two, it's safe to say he's not going to develop a quirk. It's a relic of a bygone era, a relic. That's what he was. An old, dusty piece of biology in a world that had moved on. The memory was a phantom limb, an ache that never truly faded. It was the reason his mother's apologies always sounded like she was on the verge of tears, and the reason his classmates' taunts had such a sharp, cruel edge. It was the reason for his nickname. Still fantasizing, Deku? The voice was like gravel and gunpowder. Katsuki Bakugo loomed over his desk later that day, flanked by his usual sycophants. He snatched the notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13, from Izuku's hands. Hero Analysis for the Future? Bakugo sneered, his friends snickering behind him. Seriously? It's pathetic. You're quirkless. You'll never get into UA. He slammed the notebook between his palms, and a sharp crackle pop echoed through the classroom. A miniature explosion, sharp and hot, blackened the cover and sent a plume of acrid smoke into the air. Izuku flinched back, a strangled cry caught in his throat. You know, if you really want to be a hero that badly, there's a quick way to do it, Bakugo said, a malicious grin twisting his features as he tossed the scorched notebook out the open window. It fluttered down into the koi pond below. Just take a swan dive off the roof and pray you'll be born with a quirk in your next life. The words hit Izuku like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. For a moment, the world went silent. He stood there, trembling, as Bakugo and his cronies sauntered out, laughing. He couldn't even form a retort. All he could feel was a cold, cavernous emptiness where his hope used to be. Deku. Useless. A relic. He retrieved his notebook from the pond, the pages soggy and bleeding ink. The words of his heroes, the meticulous diagrams, the carefully considered strategies, all of it was a blurred, watery mess. He squeezed it tight, water running down his arm like tears. He was just going through the motions now, his feet carrying him along a familiar path home, his mind a wasteland of Bakugo's parting words. Pray you'll be born with a quirk. The thought was a dark, insidious weed wrapping itself around his heart. Was that it? Was that all he was worth? A failed prototype? He was so lost in his misery that he didn't hear the clattering of the manhole cover behind him until it was too late. A foul, cloying stench filled the underpass, the smell of sewage and decay. A medium-sized invisibility cloak. A gurgling voice slithered from the darkness. Izuku turned, his eyes widening in horror. A monstrous being made of viscous, green sludge was pouring out of the sewer, two huge, manic eyes swimming in the ooze. It was a wave of filth and malice, and it was lunging straight for him. Don't worry, the villain gargled, its form expanding to block out the light. I'm just going to take over your body. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds, then it'll all be over. Pure, unadulterated terror seized him. He couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. The sludge enveloped him, a suffocating, liquid prison forcing its way down his throat, into his lungs. He clawed at the semi-solid mass, his fingers sinking into it uselessly. His vision began to blur, black spots dancing at the edges. I'm dying, he thought, a strange, detached calm settling over him. This is it. I'm dying. He thought of his mom, of his ruined notebook, of a dream that was about to be extinguished forever. And then, in the suffocating darkness, he heard it. Have no fear, you are safe! The manhole cover he just passed flew through the air like a discus, crashing into the villain's side with a thunderous clang. The sludge recoiled, and for a glorious moment, Izuku could breathe. He coughed, gulping in the precious, dusty air of the tunnel. Now that I am here, it's all right. The figure silhouetted against the tunnel entrance was unmistakable. The twin tufts of hair like rabbit ears, the impossibly broad shoulders, the smile that could calm a raging sea. It was All Might, in the flesh. Texas Smash! All Might's fist shot forward. It didn't even need to connect. The wind pressure alone was a physical force, a contained hurricane that blasted the sludge villain apart. The villain dissolved into 1,000 green droplets, splattering against the walls of the underpass. Izuku was buffeted by the gale, shielding his eyes as the world's greatest hero stood before him, a sun-drenched god in a world of mortals. All Might moved with practiced efficiency, scooping the scattered remnants of the villain into a pair of large soda bottles. He capped them tightly, his signature smile never wavering. He gave Izuku a thumbs up. An excellent job of holding on back there, he boomed. I apologize for getting you caught up in my battle. I don't usually make mistakes like this, but I was enjoying the city a little too much, he laughed, a sound like rolling thunder. Izuku's brain was short-circuiting. All Might. The All Might. Here. Talking to him. He scrambled for his notebook, the soggy, ruined one. Please, could you, an autograph, he stammered, fumbling to find a dry page. He opened it to see the last 2 pages were already filled with a sprawling, confident signature. He'd done it already. Izuku bowed so fast and so deep his forehead nearly scraped the pavement. Thank you so much. It'll be a family heirloom. A treasure passed down for generations, of course. Well, I must be off. The authorities are waiting. All Might said, crouching down, his leg muscles tensing for a launch that could break the sound barrier. This was it. The question. The one question that had defined his entire existence. It was now or never. He couldn't let him leave. Not yet. Wait! Izuku cried out. I have to ask you something, but All Might was already in the air. In a moment of sheer, brainless panic, Izuku did the only thing he could think of. He jumped. He grabbed onto All Might's leg and held on for dear life as they rocketed into the sky. Hey! What do you think you're doing? All Might yelled, his face contorted in a very unheroic grimace. Let go! I love my fans, but this is too much. If I let go, I'll die. Izuku screamed back, the wind whipping tears from his eyes. His face was being distorted into a grotesque mask by the G-forces. All Might's expression softened with realization. Oh. Good point. He landed them gently on the roof of a nearby department store. Izuku's legs felt like jelly. He collapsed onto the concrete, his heart hammering against his ribs. That was a very dangerous stunt, young man. All Might said, his voice stern. Bang on the door for a while. Someone will eventually let you down. He turned to leave. Is it possible? Izuku blurted out, the words tumbling from his lips before he could stop them. Can someone without a quirk become a hero like you? The question hung in the air between them, heavy and fragile. It was the core of him, the alpha and omega of his being, laid bare before his idol. All Might stopped. He didn't turn around. Without a quirk, he murmured. Izuku pressed on, a desperate torrent of words. I don't have any powers, but I've always wanted to be a hero. To save people with a fearless smile, just like you. I want to be a symbol of hope. Can I? He looked up, and the world tilted on its axis. Steam was pouring off of All Might. His iconic, muscular form was deflating like a punctured balloon. In a matter of seconds, the symbol of peace was gone, replaced by a skeletal, gaunt man with sunken eyes and sharp, angular features. A thin trickle of blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. Izuku stared, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. What? You're not. You're an imposter. A fake, the man sighed, a wheezing, rattling sound. He sat down heavily on the rooftop ledge. I am All Might, he said, his voice thin and weary. He lifted his shirt to reveal a horrific, gnarled scar that covered the entire left side of his torso. It was a sunburst of ruined flesh, a crater of pain etched into his body. I got this in a fight 5 years ago, he explained, his voice devoid of its usual heroic timbre. My respiratory system was nearly destroyed, and my stomach was removed. I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day. The rest of the time, I look like this. He gestured to his emaciated frame. What you see on TV, that's just me flexing, puffing out my chest to fool the world. The symbol of peace has to be an unwavering pillar of hope. But this is the reality. Izuku could only stare, horrified. The dream was cracking, its foundations crumbling to dust. To answer your question, All Might said, his gaze distant. Pro-heroes are always having to risk their lives. Some villains can't be beaten without raw power. So no, I honestly don't think you can become a hero without a quirk. The words were quiet. They were not cruel, like Bakugo's. They were worse. They were honest. They were the final nail in the coffin of his 4-year-old self's dream. It's good to have dreams, kid, All Might continued, standing up and heading for the rooftop door. Just make sure they're realistic. And then he was gone, leaving Izuku alone on the roof with the wind and the wreckage of his life. The walk home was a blur. The city sounds were muted, the vibrant colors washed out. All Might's words echoed in his head, a funeral dirge for his aspirations. Be realistic. Be realistic. Then he heard it. An explosion. Then another. He looked up to see a pillar of black smoke rising from a familiar shopping district, the one Bakugo and his friends often frequented. A morbid curiosity pulled him forward, his feet moving on autopilot. A crowd had gathered, their faces a mixture of fear and excitement. The pro-heroes were there, Kamui Woods, Death Arms, Backdraft, but they weren't doing anything. They were holding the perimeter, keeping civilians back. He's got a hostage! Someone yelled. Izuku pushed his way to the front, and his blood ran cold. It was the same sludge villain. It had escaped. The soda bottles were lying empty on the ground nearby. It's my fault, he realized with a sickening lurch in his stomach. When I grabbed onto his leg, I must have knocked them loose. The villain was a thrashing, chaotic mass of green. And trapped inside it, suffocating just as he had been, was a familiar figure with spiky ash-blonde hair, his hands sparking with frantic, desperate explosions. It was Bakugo. Kaken. Izuku's world narrowed to that single, horrifying image. Bakugo, the one who was always so strong, so confident, so powerful, was drowning. His eyes, wide with a terror Izuku had never seen in them before, met Izuku's for a fleeting second. And in that second, Izuku didn't see a bully. He saw a kid who was scared. A kid who needed help. The pro-heroes were paralyzed. I can't get a grip on him, Death Arms shouted. He's too fluid, and with the kid's explosion quirk, I can't risk getting close and starting a fire. Kamui Woods added, pulling back civilians. They couldn't do anything. They were waiting. Waiting for someone with the right quirk. Waiting for a hero. And then, Izuku's legs moved. It wasn't a decision. It wasn't a thought. It was a primal, undeniable instinct. One moment he was rooted to the spot in the crowd, the next he was sprinting, his worn-out red sneakers slapping against the pavement, breaking the police line. Hey! Kid! Stop! The hero's shouts were distant noise. His mind was a maelstrom of panic and adrenaline. What am I doing? I have no quirk. I'm going to die. But his legs kept pumping. His mind flashed to his notebook, to page 25. Sludge villain, vulnerable in his solid parts, specifically his eyes and teeth. Distraction could create an opening for the hostage to breathe. He swung his yellow backpack off his shoulders and hurled it with all his might. It sailed through the air and struck the villain squarely in one of its massive eyes. The monster roared in pain, its liquid form recoiling for a split second. It was enough. Bakugo's mouth was uncovered. He gasped, sucking in a ragged, desperate breath. Kaken! Izuku yelled, his voice cracking. He clawed at the sludge, his fingers digging into the filth, trying to pull his childhood friend free. What the hell are you doing here, Deku? Bakugo choked out, his voice a mix of fury and fear. I don't know. Izuku sobbed, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the grime. My legs, they just started moving. I couldn't just stand there and watch you die. The villain recovered its senses, its rage now focused entirely on the small, quirkless boy who dared to interfere. A massive tendril of sludge, tipped with a hard, viscous edge, shot towards him. This was it. There would be no All Might to save him this time. Time seemed to slow, to stretch like taffy. His gaze, wild with terror, locked onto Bakugo's flailing hand, the one still crackling with tiny, desperate pops of energy. He saw the sheen of nitroglycerin like sweat, the tensed muscles, the way the air shimmered with heat around his palm. In that instant, something impossible happened inside him. It wasn't a thought. It was a feeling. A distinct click in the deepest recesses of his mind, like a lock tumbling open. A phantom sensation bloomed in his right hand, a tingling warmth, a strange, crackling energy that felt both alien and intimately familiar. He felt a sudden, intuitive understanding of heat, pressure, and combustion. He didn't know how he knew it, he just did. Acting on pure instinct, born from 1,000 viewings of Bakugo's fights, Izuku threw his own hand forward, palm open, mirroring the motion he had seen his friend make countless times. Crack! It wasn't the deafening roar of Bakugo's explosions. It was a sharp, percussive pop, like a giant firecracker. A small, brilliant flash of orange-white light burst from his palm. It was weak, pathetic even, compared to the real thing. But it was hot, and it was concussive. The blast, no bigger than his fist, struck the villain's liquid eye, the only solid part of its body. The creature howled, a gurgling shriek of surprise and pain, its entire form flinching back violently. The shock of the recoil made Izuku stumble. He looked down at his hand. It stung, a sharp, prickly pain, and smelled faintly of burnt sugar. The crackling energy, the intuitive knowledge, the warmth, it was gone. Completely. As if it had never been there at all. His hand was just a hand again. Cold, trembling, and utterly normal. He stared at it, his mind a maelstrom of confusion. What was that? He didn't have time to process it. The villain, enraged, was about to bring its full mass down upon them both. But the opening Izuku had created, that single, baffling second of defiance, was all the hero needed. I really am pathetic. A muscular hand clamped down on Izuku's shoulder, pulling him back. All Might stood there, his form no longer gaunt but once again a towering monument of muscle, though blood was trickling from his mouth. I told you the traits that make a great hero, All Might said, his voice grim. But I see now I wasn't living up to my own ideals. Pros are always risking their lives. That's the true test of a hero. He grabbed Izuku and Bakugo, bracing himself against the villain's onslaught. Detroit smash! The resulting punch was cataclysmic. The wind pressure changed the weather, clouds swirling as the villain was not just dispersed, but obliterated. It began to rain, not from the sky, but from the moisture in the air, condensed by the sudden, drastic change in atmospheric pressure. The fight was over. The aftermath was a blur. The pro-heroes swarmed in, gathering up the villain's remains. The press descended. Bakugo was praised for his bravery, his powerful quirk. Izuku, on the other hand, was scolded severely by Kamui Woods and Death Arms for his recklessness. There was absolutely no reason for you to put yourself in danger like that, son. He could only bow his head and mumble apologies, the strange event with his hand already feeling like a fever dream. He turned to walk home, the weight of the day pressing down on him, his brief moment of, whatever that was, already fading into the humiliation of the scolding. DKU, he turned. It was Bakugo. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. I didn't need you to save me. I had it handled. You hear me? I didn't need your help. You didn't do anything. You're just a quirkless failure. Don't you ever look down on me again. He spun on his heel and stomped away, his pride more wounded than his body. Izuku watched him go, a hollow feeling in his chest. Of course. Nothing had changed. He was still just Deku. I am here! The booming voice made him jump a foot in the air. All Might, in his muscle form, zipped out from a side street, coming to a sudden halt before him. All Might? What are you doing here? You were surrounded by reporters. Getting away from them is child's play for me. He laughed, before suddenly deflating in a massive cloud of steam, reverting to his skeletal form and spitting a gout of blood. Young man, I came to thank you, and to apologize. And also, Tashinori Yagi, the man behind the smile, looked at him, his sunken eyes sharp and piercing. I have a question for you. When you were there, facing that villain, what you did, that wasn't just a reckless act. Izuku flinched. I'm sorry, I know it was stupid. No, not that. Tashinori interrupted, his gaze intense. Your hand. I saw it from the crowd. A spark. A small explosion. It looked for all the world like young Bakugo's quirk. But it came from you. Tell me what happened. Izuku stared at him, dumbfounded. He saw it? He thought he'd imagined it. I don't know. He stammered, holding up his hand and looking at it as if it belonged to someone else. My mind went blank, and I was just looking at Kaken's hand, and then my hand felt hot, and I just pushed. Tashinori's eyes widened, a flicker of something profound. Awe, shock, understanding, dawning in them. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. My boy, all my life, I've seen and fought alongside thousands of quirks. But I've never seen anything like that. You ran into a fight you knew you couldn't win. You acted before anyone else, and in that moment of absolute desperation, when your life and the life of another hung in the balance, you awakened something. Izuku's heart was pounding. Awakened? But the toe joint. The doctor said. I was quirkless, he whispered, the words tasting like ash. Doctors can be wrong, Tashinori said, a small, genuine smile gracing his thin lips for the first time. Some quirks are so specific, so esoteric, that they lie dormant until a very precise trigger is pulled. Perhaps yours required the will of a true hero to activate. He looked Izuku square in the eye. I told you that you couldn't be a hero without a quirk. I was wrong. You, more than anyone I've met today, embodied the spirit of one. What you did was foolish, yes, but it was also heroic. And now, he let out a soft, wondering breath. Now you have a power to match that spirit. He had a power. A quirk. The words sounded foreign, impossible. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes, hot and sudden. The dam of a lifetime of despair finally broke. I came here, Tashinori said, his voice soft but firm, to make you a proposition. The quirk I saw was a copy. Fleeting. Weak. But it was there. A power like that is useless without strategy, without a plan, without a body strong enough to handle the strain of 1,000 different abilities. It is a power that could be the most versatile in the world, or the most useless. It all depends on the user. He placed a bony hand on Izuku's shoulder. I told you on that roof that you couldn't be a hero. Let me amend that. Let me help you become one. Let me train you, not to inherit my power. I see now that you have your own miraculous path to walk. It would be a disservice to burden you with my legacy when you are just beginning to write your own. Let me help you master the quirk that you were born with. Izuku fell to his knees, the sobs coming in great, shuddering waves. It was too much. The despair, the terror, the spark, the hope. It was a tidal wave of emotion that left him breathless. Through his tears, he looked up at the skeletal man who was, in that moment, more of a hero than the muscle-bound giant had ever been. What will you call it? Tashinori asked gently. Every quirk needs a name. Izuku thought back to the feeling. The brief, brilliant flash of power. It wasn't his own. It was a perfect imitation, a reverberation of Bakugo's own strength, that had faded almost as soon as it appeared, leaving only a faint memory behind, like a sound bouncing off a distant wall. An echo, Izuku whispered, his voice thick with tears, but with a new, unbreakable thread of steel woven into it. I'll call it Echo. Tashinori smiled, a wide, triumphant grin that looked far more real on his gaunt face than the practiced one on his hero persona. Echo, he repeated, the word full of promise. I like it. All right then, young Midoriya. Your story, the story of the hero Deku, begins now. And it will be a story that echoes through history. For the first time in 10 years, Izuku Midoriya looked toward the future and saw not a void, but a brilliant, blinding, and utterly terrifying light. His dream wasn't dead. It had just been sparked to life. The dawn that broke the day after Izuku Midoriya's world had been shattered and rebuilt was a fragile, watery orange. He had barely slept, his mind a frantic reel of the previous day's events. The suffocating sludge, the fury in Bakugo's eyes, the impossible spark in his own hand, and All Might's words, the words that had sounded the death knell of his dream, and then, impossibly, had become its genesis. You have a power to match that spirit. He sat up in bed, his All Might-themed room feeling different now. It was no longer just a shrine to an idol. It was a testament to a promise. He held up his right hand, turning it over in the dim light. It looked the same. Plain, slightly calloused, with a faint scar on the knuckle from a childhood fall. There was no lingering warmth, no crackle of latent energy. It was just a hand. And yet, it had produced fire and light. It had answered the deepest, most desperate prayer of his soul. A text message buzzed on his nightstand, the screen illuminating his face. It was from an unknown number. Unknown, Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. Sunrise. Don't be late. And bring a good pair of gloves. Izuku's heart hammered. It was him. He scrambled out of bed, his movements clumsy with a nervous energy that felt like lightning in his veins. He scribbled a hasty note for his mother, going for an early morning run. Be back for breakfast. A lie that tasted strange on his tongue. His life, it seemed, was now destined to be filled with secrets. He found the beach easily. Or rather, he found the mountain range of refuse that had long ago swallowed what used to be a beach. For years, illegal dumping and ocean currents had conspired to turn this stretch of coastline into a metallic, plastic graveyard. Rusted husks of cars were piled next to mountains of defunct appliances. Refrigerators lay on their sides like fallen titans, their doors agape. The air hung thick with the stench of salt, rust, and decay. And standing atop the highest peak of garbage, silhouetted against the rising sun, was the skeletal form of Tashinori Yagi. Good morning, young Midoriya! He called down, his voice thin but carrying in the morning air. Beautiful view, isn't it? A perfect monument to societal neglect. And a perfect place for us to begin. Izuku, panting slightly from his run, stared up at the man and the mountain of trash. All might, sir, what are we doing here? Toshinori hopped down with a surprising agility, landing softly on the sand-dusted pavement. Two things, my boy. First, community service. A hero serves the people, and right now, the people need their beach back. Second, and more importantly, this is your gym. He gestured to the junkyard with a sweep of his bony arm. This is where you will forge your body into a vessel worthy of your Quirk. He produced a folded, meticulously detailed printout from his pocket. It was a workout plan of staggering intensity, titled the American Dream Plan. It detailed sleep schedules, dietary restrictions, and a physical regimen that made Izuku's head spin. Hauling, lifting, running, sorting, all using the endless supply of garbage around them. This is a lot, Izuku said, his eyes wide. Heroism is a lot, Toshinori countered, his tone serious. Your Quirk, Echo, is potentially one of the most versatile in existence. But think about it. If you copy a strength-enhancing Quirk, what happens if your arm can't handle the torque? It will snap like a twig. If you copy a speed Quirk, what happens if your legs and core can't handle the sudden acceleration? You'll tear every muscle from the bone. Your body, young Midoriya, must become a master of all trades, just like your Quirk. It needs to be strong, fast, and durable enough to withstand the shock of becoming something new every 20 seconds. This trash? You aren't just moving it. You're building your foundation. It made a terrifying amount of sense. His body wasn't a weapon, it was the handle. If the handle was weak, the blade was useless, no matter how sharp. But what about my Quirk? Izuku asked, his voice full of anticipation. When do we start training that? Toshinori's expression became even more serious, like a scholar about to explain a dangerous and volatile chemical reaction. We start understanding it right now. The physical training is paramount, but we must also define the limits of what you can do. Knowledge is power, and in your case, it's also safety. Tell me again, exactly what you felt. Izuku closed his eyes, trying to recall the fleeting moment. It was like a switch flipped. I was looking at Kaken, at his Quirk, and I just understood it. Not how it worked scientifically, but how it felt to use it. There was this heat in my palm, and then, nothing. It was gone. Toshinori nodded slowly, stroking his chin. Fascinating. A conscious, targeted copy. It seems your intent is the key. You wanted to help him, and your power gave you a fraction of his to do so. Let's establish the rules. The laws of Echo. For the next hour, they didn't lift a single piece of trash. They sat on a rusted, overturned washing machine as Toshinori interrogated Izuku, pulling apart his single experience with the focus of a detective. They walked the edge of the beach, a safe distance from the public path, looking for subjects. The first rule they established was line of sight. See that woman over there? Toshinori pointed to a jogger stretching against the railing. A faint aura of pink light pulsed around her calves. A minor muscle enhancement Quirk, judging by the glow, common for athletes. I want you to focus on her. Not on her as a person, but on her Quirk. Try to feel what you felt before. Izuku took a deep breath, his heart thumping. He stared at the woman's legs, at the gentle thrum of pink energy. He tried to replicate the desperate focus he'd had in the alley. He thought about the power, tried to will it into himself. He felt nothing. It's not working, he said, frustrated. You're trying too hard, my boy, Toshinori said patiently. You're thinking. Yesterday you were acting. It's not about wanting the Quirk, it's about identifying it. See it. Isolate it in your mind. Izuku tried again. He let his analytical brain take over. Quirk, muscle enhancement, lower body. Type emitter. Visual cue, pink energy aura. Application, increased running speed and leg strength. He broke it down, cataloged it, the way he would in his notebook. And then he felt it. The faintest tingle. A mental click. A warmth spread through his own legs, a feeling of coiled, potential energy. I think I have it, he gasped. Good. That's rule 2, Toshinori said. Conscious focus. You can't just glance at someone. You have to actively analyze and target the quirk itself. Now hold it. Don't use it. Just feel it. Izuku stood there, the foreign power buzzing in his limbs. It was a strange, heady sensation. 1, 2, 3. Toshinori counted, watching his stopwatch. 9, 10. The feeling vanished. Abruptly. It wasn't a fade, it was a switch being flipped off. His legs were his own again, tired and weak from his morning run. And that's rule 3, Toshinori announced, clicking the stopwatch. 10-second duration. Exactly. Not a moment more. He clicked the watch again. Now try to copy it again. Izuku focused on the jogger, who was now running down the path. He tried to get the feeling back, but his mind felt fuzzy. There was a barrier, a mental wall where the connection had been. I can't, he said, bewildered. It's like the signal is busy. Toshinori watched his stopwatch intently. And now? Try again. Izuku focused, and the click was there. The power flowed back into his legs. Toshinori clicked his watch and smiled grimly. Just as I suspected. There's a refractory period. A cooldown. 10 seconds on, 10 seconds off. Rule 4, the cooldown. For every 10 seconds of use, you have 10 seconds of powerlessness where you cannot copy anything. That, my boy, is your greatest weakness. A 10-second window where you are completely vulnerable. The implication settled on Izuku like a lead weight. In a battle, 10 seconds was an eternity. It was enough time for a villain to land a finishing blow. There's one more rule we need to test, Toshinori said, his eyes scanning the area. He spotted a man using a simple telekinetic quirk to pull his newspaper from a bench a few feet away. There. Him, that man with the paper. Copy his quirk. Izuku focused, his mind now getting the hang of the process. He targeted the subtle shimmer of psychic energy around the man's head. Click. The mental imprint settled in. It was a strange sensation, like a new piece of software had been installed in his brain. He understood the idea of moving something with his mind. Excellent, Toshinori said. Now see that empty soda can over there? He pointed to a can lying 10 feet away. Lift it. Izuku took a breath, feeling the 10-second timer already ticking in his head. He focused his will on the can, just as he imagined the man had done with his newspaper. He pushed with his mind. The can wobbled. And then shot straight up into the air, spun in a wild circle, and clattered uselessly back to the ground. Izuku grunted, the mental effort making his nose ache. Toshinori chuckled softly. And there it is. The final, and most important rule. No innate skill. You get the tool, my boy, but not the instruction manual. You copied his quirk, but you don't have his years of practice. You have the power, but none of the control. The full picture of his quirk was now laid bare, and it was terrifying. He could become anyone, but only for a moment. He had a Swiss Army knife with 1,000 blades, but each one would vanish from his hand 10 seconds after he selected it, and he'd have to wait another 10 seconds before he could even pick a new one, and he wouldn't know how to properly hold any of them. This is a lot harder than I thought, Izuku whispered, the enormity of the challenge crashing down on him. Of course it is, Toshinori said, his voice firm but not unkind. If it were easy, everyone would be a hero. Now, the lesson is over. The work begins. He pointed to a rusted, gargantuan refrigerator. Your first task. Get that into the truck I've parked on the street. Your 10 months for the UA entrance exam start now. The 10 months that followed were a blur of pain, sweat, and relentless perseverance. Izuku's life fell into a grueling rhythm. Wake before dawn, meet Toshinori at the beach. Hours of backbreaking labor, hauling twisted metal and waterlogged furniture, his muscles screaming in protest. Then school, where he tried to stay awake through lectures, his body aching with a profound exhaustion he'd never known. After school, it was back to the beach for more training, this time focusing on the quirk itself, followed by homework and a final, desperate cram session with his hero notebooks before collapsing into bed. The notebooks became his Bible. They were no longer just fanbook collections of trivia, They were tactical manuals, his single most important weapon. He stopped just analyzing what a hero's quirk was, and started obsessively theorizing what he could do with it in 10 seconds. An entry on the hero Ciro, who could produce tape from his elbows, was a perfect example. Hero, cellophane, Ciro Hanta, quirk, tape. Previous analysis, excellent for mobility and capture. Limited offensive capability. Works best in urban environments with high anchor points. Echo 10-second application analysis. Objective, mobility. Action, copy. Immediately fire a tape line at a high point. Swing. Time estate. 1s, copy. 2s, aim/fire. 5s, swing. 2s, release/land. Total, 10s. Cooldown strategy. The swing's momentum must carry me into cover, e.g., behind a wall, onto a roof, to survive the 10's cooldown period. High risk, high reward. Objective, rescue/environmental. Action, copy. Create a safety line or brace a falling object. Time estate, 1s, copy. 9s, continuous tape stream to create a net or secure an object. Limitation, tape will vanish after 10 seconds. Only useful for momentary holds, buying time for civilian evacuation. Objective, distraction/entrapment. Action, copy. Rapidly fire small tape strips at an opponent's face/feet. Time estate, 1s, copy. 9s, rapid fire. Purpose, not to capture, but to disorient. Blind an enemy for a few crucial seconds to set up a different attack or escape. Conclusion, high utility quirk for Echo. Versatility is its key strength. Must practice aim under pressure. The feeling of the tape ejecting is likely jarring. Need to account for recoil and stance. He filled 3 entire notebooks with this new form of analysis. Every student in his class with a quirk, every pro hero he saw on the news, every civilian he passed on the street with a minor manifestation, they were all data points, potential tools in his arsenal. He became a silent, obsessive observer of the world's powers. The practical drills with Toshinori were humbling, frustrating, and often hilarious. The levitation drill was their first real attempt at control. Toshinori placed an empty can on a rock. The goal is simple, young Midoriya. Copy the quirk of that woman reading on the bench. She's making her book float. And move the can from that rock to this one. Izuku took his position. He focused, felt the click of echo activating, and then channeled his will at the can. The mental imprint gave him the concept of psionic force, but no sense of fine control. He pushed with his mind. The can shot sideways and ricocheted off a pile of old tires. Too much force, Toshinori coached. It's not a shove, it's a lift. Be gentle. On his next attempt, 20 seconds later, he tried to be gentle. The can wobbled pitifully and fell over. The 10 seconds expired. He groaned in frustration. It took him 2 weeks, practicing every day, before he could reliably lift the can and move it 5 feet without it careening off into the junk pile. The fire drill was more nerve-wracking. Toshinori found a high schooler on his lunch break, idly lighting and extinguishing a small flame on his thumb to warm his hands. All right, my boy. Your turn. Just a small, controlled flame. Enough to light this candle. Izuku copied the quirk. The imprint gave him the knowledge of igniting the oxygen around his thumb. He tried it, and a plume of fire the size of a melon erupted from his hand, singeing the sleeve of his tracksuit and making him yelp in surprise. He frantically batted it out as the power vanished. Control, young Midoriya! Control! Toshinori yelled, though he had a small, amused smile on his face. You are not Bakugo! Your power is not about raw output, it is about precision. The worst was the strength drill. He'd made significant progress on the American Dream Plan, his once scrawny frame now corded with lean muscle. He felt stronger, more stable. Toshinori decided it was time to test it. He pointed out a man jogging past who had a very obvious strength quirk, his feet cracking the pavement slightly with each step. Just for 2 seconds, Toshinori instructed. Copy it, and take 1 step, Izuku complied. The moment Echo activated, it felt like a bolt of lightning had shot through his spine. His body was flooded with a power it was not built for. He took a single, lurching step. His center of gravity, which he had so painstakingly mastered, was thrown completely off. He stumbled forward, his leg moving with more force than he intended. He didn't fall, but he pitched forward violently, catching himself on a pile of scrap metal with a jarring impact that sent a shockwave up his arms. The 2 seconds felt like an eternity. Then the power was gone, leaving him shaky and disoriented. "You see?" Toshinori said, his expression grim. "Even with months of training, a sudden influx of power can overwhelm you. Your body is the anchor. It must always be braced for the storm." The months bled into one another. The mountain of trash began to shrink. Izuku's body hardened, the chronic ache in his muscles replaced by a feeling of solid, reliable strength. His quirk training grew more complex. Toshinori would point out 2 different civilians. "Copy her levitation to lift that tire, and as soon as your cooldown is over, copy his kinetic burst quirk to shove it 10 feet to the left." It was mental gymnastics of the highest order. He had to plan 2 steps ahead, using his 10-second cooldown not as a period of vulnerability, but as a period of repositioning and retargeting. He learned to use a mobility quirk to get into a safe spot, wait out the 10 seconds while acquiring his next target, and then activate Echo again from his new vantage point. It was a rhythm, a frantic, ticking dance of power, weakness, power, weakness. Finally, with 1 week to go before the UA exam, the final truckload of scrap was hauled away. Izuku stood on the shores of Dagoba Beach, his shirt off, his body lean and defined with the kind of musculature born from hard labor. Where once there were mountains of trash, there was now only clean, golden sand, meeting the gentle waves of the sea. The sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the reclaimed coastline. Toshinori, in his muscle form, stood beside him. He took a picture of Izuku with his phone. "Look at this, my boy," he said, showing him the photo. It was a before picture, taken on that very first day. A scrawny, terrified kid lost in a baggy tracksuit. He swiped to show a live view of Izuku now, strong, scarred, and resolute. The transformation was staggering. "You did it!" All Might boomed, his voice thick with pride. "You did the impossible. You took 10 months of hell and you turned it into a miracle." Izuku looked at his hands, then out at the clean beach. "I just did what you told me to." "No," All Might said, deflating back into his skeletal form with a hiss of steam. "I gave you the map, young Midoriya. You walked the path. But our work is not done. There's one final test before the exam." He led Izuku to a section of the beach where he had set up a crude obstacle course using leftover driftwood and rocks. "The goal is simple. Get from the starting line to that rock over there," he said, pointing about 50 yards away. "The catch is, you can't just run." From behind a large boulder, 2 figures emerged. They were older men, dressed in police tracksuits. One was tall and lanky, the other short and stout. "These are old friends of mine from the force," Toshinori explained. "Detective Tanida here." He gestured to the lanky one. "Has a quirk that allows him to stretch his limbs up to 3 times their normal length. Officer Suzuki." He nodded to the stout one. "Has a quirk that lets him secrete a temporary, weak adhesive from his hands and feet." The 2 men nodded curtly at Izuku. "They are your only tools," Toshinori said, his eyes glinting. "You will have to chain their quirks to get through the course. You will have to manage your cooldown. You will have to think on your feet. This is not about control anymore, my boy. This is about strategy. Begin." Izuku's mind raced. He looked at the course. A tall wall of driftwood was the first obstacle. He looked at Detective Tanida. Line of sight. Conscious focus. Click. Seconds 1 to 10. He copied long limbs. His arms felt like rubber bands. He stretched them, hooking his hands over the top of the 10-foot wall. He pulled himself up and over, his body feeling awkward and gangly. He landed on the other side just as the power vanished, his limbs snapping back to their normal size with a strange, non-painful recoil. Seconds 11 to 20, cooldown. He was exposed. He scrambled behind a large rock, his heart pounding. From his new position, he could see Officer Suzuki. He analyzed the quirk, a faint sheen on the man's palms. Seconds 21 to 30, he copied adhesion. A patch of sand lay before him, designed to slow him down. He activated the quirk in his feet, the sticky sensation odd but effective. He walked across the sand pit without sinking, his feet peeling off the ground with a faint schlick sound. The power cut out just as he reached the other side. Seconds 31 to 40, cool down. He was halfway there. The final obstacle was a wide, 5-foot gap between two rocks. Too far to jump normally. He needed a mobility quirk, but he'd already used the obvious one. He looked back at his targets. Tanita was too far for a limb stretch to be useful here. Suzuki's adhesion was for climbing, not crossing. His eyes darted around, his brain working furiously. Think, Izuku, think. 10 seconds is all you get. Then he saw it. Tanita wasn't just standing there. He was demonstrating his quirk to Toshinori, playfully stretching his leg to tap a piece of driftwood. It wasn't just about length, it was about momentum. Seconds 41 to 50, he copied long limbs again. This time, he didn't stretch his arms. He planted one foot firmly and stretched the other leg behind him, pushing off the ground like a coiled spring. It was a bizarre, loping leap, more of a controlled fall than a jump, but it worked. He cleared the gap, landing in a clumsy roll on the other side. He scrambled to his feet and slapped the final rock. He had done it. He was panting, his body humming with adrenaline. Toshinori clapped slowly, a wide, proud grin on his face. Brilliant, my boy! Absolutely brilliant! You used the quirk in a way even its owner might not have considered. You didn't just use the tool, you innovated with it. Izuku beamed, a feeling of accomplishment washing over him that was more satisfying than any physical strength. Toshinori walked over, placing a hand on his shoulder. His expression grew serious again, and his gaze was piercing. You have done well, young Midoriya. You have a strong body, a brilliant mind, and a heroic heart. But you must never forget the nature of your power. It is a ticking clock. Every single second counts. He leaned in closer, his voice low and intense. Anyone can throw a punch with my power, my boy. Anyone can smash a robot. But that is not your path. Your challenge is different. Your challenge is this. Can you disarm a bomb in 10 seconds with a dozen different tools you've never used before, while the clock is ticking in your ear? Can you make a life-or-death decision in the single second it takes to acquire a target? Can you find the perfect, obscure quirk in a crowd of panicking civilians to solve a problem no one else can? That is your burden. And that is your strength. He straightened up, his eyes seeming to hold the light of the sunrise in them. You are not a hammer, destined to see every problem as a nail. You are the entire toolbox. You have the potential to be every hero, if only for a moment. Never forget how heavy, and how precious, each of those moments is. Izuku looked at his hands, then at his mentor, and finally at the imposing gates of UA High School in the distance. He was ready. The clock was ticking, and for the first time in his life, he was ready to race it. The air outside the gates of UA High was electric, a buzzing hive of nervous energy, unbridled ambition, and 1,000 different quirks simmering just below the surface. Izuku stood amidst the throng of examinees, feeling terrifyingly small. He clutched the straps of his backpack, his knuckles white. 10 months of Herculean labor, of hauling trash and pushing his body to its breaking point, had led to this single morning. 10 months of whispering strategies into his notebooks, of mental gymnastics with all might, of learning the frantic, ticking rhythm of his own impossible quirk. It all came down to the next hour. His eyes, no longer those of a mere fanboy but of a practiced analyst, scanned the crowd. It was a reflex now, an ingrained habit. He wasn't just seeing people, he was seeing a palette of potential tools. A girl with long, prehensile hair like purple snakes chatted with her friend. Quirk, Medusa hair? Type mutation. Potential echo use, grappling, multidirectional manipulation. Control required extreme. A boy with shoulders that looked like actual car tires stretched his arms. Quirk, wheel shoulders? Type mutation / emitter? Potential echo use, high-speed rolling charge. Physical toll, severe. Avoid. He was so absorbed in his cataloging that he didn't notice the person who had stopped beside him until they spoke. Move it, obstacle. Izuku flinched. The voice was unmistakable, a rasp of irritation and arrogance. He turned to see Katsuki Bakugo shouldering his way past, his crimson eyes sweeping over Izuku with dismissive contempt. There was a flicker of confusion in that gaze, a brief question as he registered Izuku's presence at the UA gates, but it was quickly smothered by his usual explosive arrogance. He saw Izuku as nothing more than a pebble on his path to greatness. He still thought he was quirkless. A part of Izuku, the small, frightened part that still answered to the name Deku, wanted to shrink away. But another part, the part forged on Dagoba Beach, stood its ground. He met Bakugo's glare for a split second before the other boy scoffed and stalked off into the crowd. The encounter left him trembling slightly, a bitter reminder of the chasm between them. Bakugo was a force of nature, a born hero with a perfect quirk. Izuku was a thief, a mimic who held power like sand in his fists, for 10 precious seconds at a time. Out of my way, please. It is imperative that we all proceed in an orderly fashion. A new voice, sharp and commanding, cut through his thoughts. A tall, broad-shouldered boy with dark blue hair and glasses was striding through the crowd with an air of immense self-importance. His legs, Izuku noticed immediately, were oddly shaped, with what looked like metallic exhaust pipes protruding from his calves. Quirk engine. Obvious mobility type. Emitter. Generates thrust. Question: fuel source? Is it biological? How is the heat managed? 10-second application would be purely for linear speed. High risk of stumbling due to unfamiliar center of gravity. Izuku was so lost in his analysis that he took a clumsy step backward to get a better look, his foot catching on an uneven paving stone. He pinwheeled his arms, a mortified gasp escaping his lips as he began to fall. This was it. This was how his dream ended, not with a bang, but with a humiliating faceplant in front of hundreds of his competitors. But the impact never came. He stopped midair, a strange, weightless sensation enveloping him. Whoa there! Are you okay? A bright, cheerful voice asked. He looked over to see a girl with a round, kind face and a permanent blush on her cheeks holding her hand out, her pinky finger raised. She had touched his backpack. Her quirk. He felt his feet settle gently back on the ground. It's my quirk, she said with an easy smile, pressing her fingertips together. Sorry for using it on you without asking, but it's a bad omen to trip and fall, right? I'm sure you're nervous, too. I know I am. Let's do our best. She gave him a wave and bounced off toward the entrance, leaving Izuku frozen in place. His mind wasn't focused on her kindness, or the fact that she'd saved him from embarrassment. It was locked onto her power. Quirk, zero gravity. Activates on touch with the pads on her fingers. Deactivates by pressing them together. She has complete control. 5-point contact required. What's the weight limit? Can she make herself float? The potential applications, it's staggering. He was shaken from his reverie by the massive doors of the auditorium swinging open. The written portion of the exam was a blur of logic problems and ethical questions. Izuku felt confident. His analytical mind, honed by years of quirk study, made quick work of the situational puzzles. But that wasn't the real test. The real test was waiting for them in the practical exam orientation hall. The lights dimmed, and a single, massive spotlight hit the stage, revealing a man in a leather jacket, spiky blonde hair, and a pair of sunglasses. Despite the dim lighting, a huge speaker-like device was around his neck. What's up, UA candidates? Welcome to the show! The hero, Present Mike, screamed into a microphone, the volume making the whole room vibrate. Everybody say hey. Silence. Izuku, a lifelong hero fan, felt a small thrill despite his anxiety. Tough crowd. Present Mike muttered, before launching into a high-speed explanation of the practical exam. They would be sent to a massive, custom-built urban cityscape. Spread throughout were 4 types of villain robots, worth 1, 2, or 3 points depending on their difficulty. The goal was to use their quirks to immobilize as many as possible within the time limit. Your goal, little listeners, is to rack up a heroic score. On the screen behind him, pixelated images of the 3 robots appeared. Izuku's mind immediately went to work. 1-pointer, small, agile. Likely weak armor. A precision quirk, or a basic strength quirk would be enough. 2-pointer, mid-sized, seems to have ranged capabilities. Requires a defensive or more powerful offensive quirk. 3-pointer, large, heavily armored. High-impact quirks needed. Brute force or a specialized piercing ability. And finally, President Mick's voice dropped conspiratorially. There's the fourth villain type. The 0-pointer. This big fella is more of a stage hazard. He's worth 0 points, so my advice is to run away. As he spoke, a colossal shadow fell over the other 3 robots on the screen, an image of a machine the size of a skyscraper. Excuse me. I have a question. The sharp, commanding voice belonged to the boy with the engine legs. He stood ramrod straight, a spotlight finding him in the crowd. On the printout, there are clearly 4 types of villains listed. If the fourth is worth 0 points, it is a gross misrepresentation. UA, as Japan's most prestigious hero academy, should not make such a foolish error. He then whirled around, one accusatory finger pointing directly at Izuku. And you, he declared, his voice ringing with indignation. With the curly hair. You have been muttering and fidgeting this entire time. It is distracting and unbecoming of a potential UE student. If you are not going to take this seriously, then you should leave. The entire hall turned to stare. Izuku's face flushed crimson. He clamped his mouth shut, sinking down in his seat as waves of shame and anxiety washed over him. He was trying to take it seriously. That was the problem. His mind was in overdrive, a constant stream of analysis and strategy. It was how he survived. President Mike just gave the engine-legged boy a casual thumbs up. All right, Examinee 7111, thanks for the call-out. The 0-pointer is an obstacle, got it? Something to test your evasion skills. That's all I've got for you. Now, let's get this party started. As my hero's school motto says, plus ultra. The lights came up, and they were herded towards different buses, assigned to different battle centers. Izuku found himself at the gates of Battle Center B, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He was separated from the girl, from Bakugo, and from the loud boy with the engines. He was alone. He took a series of deep, calming breaths, just as Toshinori had taught him. Don't focus on the chaos. Focus on the objective. Identify tools. Execute. Survive cooldown. Repeat. The gates were massive, at least 100 feet tall, sealing off the fake city within. Everyone was stretching, psyching themselves up. Izuku's eyes were wide, scanning, always scanning. A girl was generating small shields of pink light on her arms. A boy was making his fingers as sharp as drills. A living arsenal surrounded him. Right, let's start. President Mick's voice boomed from unseen speakers. Everyone looked around, confused. Get moving! There are no countdowns in a real fight. Run! Run! The massive gates began to swing open with a groan of stressed metal. For a second, everyone stood frozen in shock. Everyone except Izuku. Every second counts. All Might's voice echoed in his head. He didn't hesitate. He burst from the starting line, his legs pumping, the months of physical conditioning on Dagobah Beach paying off. He was the first one through the gates, a lone green-haired blur sprinting into the concrete canyon. Looks like one of them gets it. President Mick's voice boomed after him. Follow his lead, listeners! The thunder of 100 pairs of feet followed him, but he had a head start. A crucial, precious few seconds. He didn't stop to engage the first robots he saw. That would be a mistake. He needed to get deeper, to find a good vantage point, to understand the flow of the battle before he committed. He rounded a corner, and saw a 1-pointer rolling towards him. It raised a metal claw. Izuku dodged, his body moving with an agility he hadn't possessed a year ago. He let it pass, hearing it get obliterated a moment later by another examinee's quirk. He felt a pang of doubt. Kids were already scoring points. Bakugo was probably demolishing a dozen robots by now. He could hear explosions and crashes echoing through the artificial city. What was he doing? He was running. He had 0 points. Strategy over brute force, young Midoriya. You are not a hammer. He pushed the doubt down. He scrambled up the fire escape of a 4-story building, his muscles burning. From the roof, he had a panoramic view. It was chaos. Robots and examinees clashed in the streets below. He saw laser beams, explosions, expanding limbs, elemental attacks. It was a symphony of destruction. And he was the conductor, waiting for the right moment to bring in his instrument. His eyes landed on a street corner where a two-pointer had cornered a smaller examinee. The robot was firing a volley of rubber bullets, pinning the boy behind a car. Further down the street, Izuku saw him, the formal boy from the auditorium, a silver blur of speed. He was using his engine Quirk to zip between robots, delivering powerful, precise kicks that shattered their armor. He was a perfect target. Suddenly, a three-pointer blasted off its feet by another student, came crashing down towards the street where the boy was pinned. It wasn't going to hit him, but a huge chunk of the building's facade, dislodged by the impact, was. The boy was too focused on the robot in front of him to notice the tons of concrete about to crush him. There was no time to shout a warning. Izuku's mind went into overdrive. Objective: save the pinned examinee. Tool: engine Quirk. Target: examinee 7111. Cooldown plan: duck behind the nearby dumpster. He locked his gaze onto the engine-legged boy. He focused on the thrumming power, the controlled bursts of speed. Line of sight. Conscious focus. Click. Seconds 1 to 10. The power surged into his calves. It felt like strapping a pair of jet engines to his legs. He pushed off the roof, launching himself in a terrifying, uncontrolled leap. He landed hard in the street below, his knees screaming in protest at the impact his body was still not fully prepared for. He ignored the pain. He had maybe 6 seconds left. He burst forward, not with the grace of the Quirk's owner, but with a raw, desperate speed. He reached the pinned boy, grabbed the collar of his shirt, and yanked him backward with all his might. They tumbled to the ground in a heap just as the chunk of concrete smashed into the spot where the boy had been standing, pulverizing the asphalt. The power in his legs vanished, leaving them feeling like lead. Seconds 11 to 20, cooldown. He was exposed. Get back! He yelled at the boy he just saved, shoving him towards safety. Izuku scrambled behind the large metal dumpster he designated as his cover, his heart pounding. The boy stared at him, wide-eyed with shock, before shaking his head and running off to find more robots. Izuku leaned against the cold metal, panting, counting down the seconds in his head. 3, 2, 1, he peeked out. He had saved someone, but he still had 0 points. The immediate area was clear. He needed to engage. He spotted a one-pointer rolling down an alleyway. It was alone. This was his chance. But what quirk to use? He scanned his surroundings. No one with an obvious offensive power was in his line of sight. Then he saw him, a flash of red on another rooftop. A boy with spiky red hair and a determined grin was trading blows with a two-pointer, his arms turning a dark, rocky gray. Quirk, hardening. Simple, effective. Good for close quarters. Low risk of self-injury from misuse. An idea sparked. It was risky, but it was better than nothing. He waited for a one-pointer to round the corner, heading straight for him. Objective, immobilize one-pointer. Tool, hardening quirk. Target, red-haired examinee. Cooldown plan, the alley is a dead end. I'll have to double back. He focused on the boy, on the rock-solid texture of his skin. Click. Seconds 21 to 30. The quirk settled over him, a feeling of immense density. His skin felt like granite. The one-pointer lunged, its metal claw swinging. Instead of dodging, Izuku stood his ground. He threw his forearm up to block. The sound was not the screech of metal on flesh, but a dull, sickening crunch. The robot's cheap alloy claw shattered against his arm. The force of the impact still jarred him, sending a painful shockwave to his shoulder, but his arm held. The robot, its primary weapon broken, stumbled back. With 4 seconds left, Izuku lunged forward and drove his hardened fist through the robot's central chassis. There was a shower of sparks, a whine of dying servos, and it collapsed. 1 point. The feeling of density vanished, leaving his skin tingling. Seconds 31 to 40, cooldown. He immediately spun and sprinted back out of the alley, not waiting to see if more were coming. 1 point. It felt like a monumental victory. He found a new perch on a low wall, his eyes scanning for his next opportunity. He saw another student in trouble. A girl was being backed into a corner by a two-pointer. Izuku was too far away to engage directly. He needed to create a diversion. His eyes darted around, looking for a tool. And then he saw him, a boy in a glittering cape, striking a dramatic pose as he shot a sparkling laser from his navel. It was absurd, but it was exactly what he needed. Objective, distract two-pointer. Tool, naval laser. Target, sparkling examinee. Purpose, not destruction, but misdirection. He focused on the boy, on the bizarre energy gathering in his stomach. Click. Seconds 41 to 50. Izuku braced himself, clenching his core muscles as he imagined the user did. He aimed and pushed. A thin, pathetic beam of light, more of a glitter cannon than a laser, shot from his abdomen. It was barely visible in the bright daylight, but it sizzled as it struck the two-pointer's head, leaving a small, blackened scorch mark. It did no real damage, but the robot's photoreceptor swiveled towards the unexpected attack. The sudden movement was all the girl needed. She slapped the ground, and a wave of softened earth rose up, trapping the robot's legs and allowing her to finish it off. She shot a grateful, if confused, look in Izuku's general direction. He was already gone, ducking behind cover for his cooldown. 0 points for him, but another person saved. A subtle electronic ping echoed in his ear, almost too quiet to hear. He frowned. What was that? He spent the next several minutes in this rhythm. A frantic, high-stakes dance of observation, execution, and survival. He used a minor telekinesis quirk to trip a one-pointer. He copied a girl's elasticity to slingshot a piece of debris into a two-pointer's joints. He never destroyed a single robot himself after that first one, but he must have assisted in a dozen takedowns. His point count remained stubbornly at 1. The doubt was creeping back in, a cold dread that he had fundamentally misunderstood the test. And then the ground began to shake. A low, grinding rumble echoed through the city, growing louder and louder. Dust rained down from the tops of the buildings. From behind the cityscape, a shadow fell over everything, vast and absolute. The zero-pointer had arrived. It was bigger than he could have imagined. A mobile skyscraper of dark green metal, its single, glowing red eye scanning the battlefield. The other examinees, their bravado evaporating in the face of such overwhelming scale, did the sensible thing. They screamed and ran. It's the zero-pointer! Run for it! No way we can fight that thing! Izuku was about to do the same, to follow President Mick's advice and get as far away as possible. But then he heard a cry of pain. He whipped his head around. There, not 50 yards from the robot's path, was the kind girl from the entrance, Achiko Uraraka. Her leg was trapped under a huge slab of fallen concrete, a result of the zero-pointer's earth-shaking advance. She was struggling, her face pale with pain and terror, as the colossal robot bore down on her. The scene froze in Izuku's mind. The crowd running away. The heroes, the other examinees, saving themselves. A person trapped, helpless. It was the sludge villain incident all over again. My legs, they just started moving. This time, it wasn't just his legs. It was his mind, his heart, his entire being. He was already sprinting towards her before he'd even formed a conscious thought. He ignored the shouts of the fleeing students. He ignored the blaring alarm in his own head. All he saw was a person in need of a hero. He reached her side, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Are you okay? He asked, already trying to budge the massive piece of rubble. It was useless. It was far too heavy. My leg is stuck, she said, her voice trembling. You should go. It's coming. He looked up at the zero-pointer. It was so close now, its shadow a physical presence. He couldn't destroy it. He couldn't fight it. His 1 point was meaningless now. All Might's voice cut through his panic, a beacon of clarity. You are not a hammer. You are the toolbox. Find the right tool for the job. The problem wasn't the robot. The problem was weight. The robot was too heavy to stop. The rubble was too heavy to lift. His eyes snapped to Uraraka. Her quirk. The solution was her quirk. Objective, save Uraraka. Step 1, negate the robot's weight. Tool, zero gravity. Target, Achiko Uraraka. He focused on her, on the pink pads of her fingertips, on the feeling of weightlessness she had induced in him hours earlier. He pushed aside his terror and found the analytical calm he needed. Click. Seconds 1 to 10, he had her Quirk. He didn't hesitate. He scrambled up the pile of rubble, his mind a screaming countdown. 10. 9. 8. He leaped, his hand outstretched, and slapped it hard against the robot's massive, tank-treaded foot. 7. 6. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, he felt it. A subtle shift in the universe. The ground beneath the robot, which had been groaning under its immense weight, fell silent. The colossal machine, its forward momentum suddenly fighting against a complete lack of traction and gravitational pull, lurched drunkenly. It began to topple, but with an eerie, unnatural slowness, like a falling feather the size of a mountain. 3. 2. The power vanished from his hand. Seconds 11 to 20, cooldown. And he was standing directly under a now unstable, multi-ton robot. The fall had been slowed, but it was still falling, and its trajectory was still right on top of Uraraka. He had only bought them a few seconds. He needed a second move. A push. A nudge. Something to alter its course. His eyes scanned the battlefield, a desperate, frantic search. His gaze fell upon a figure watching from the edge of the street. Bakugo. He was just standing there, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief, watching Izuku do the impossible. Objective: divert the falling robot. Step 2: apply lateral force. Tool: explosion. Target: Katsuki Bakugo. He locked his gaze on Bakugo's palm, still faintly smoking from a previous blast. He saw the power, the heat, the barely contained violence. He knew that Quirk. He had felt it once before. The 10-second cooldown felt like a lifetime as the robot's shadow consumed him. 3, 2, 1, click. Seconds 21 to 30. He had explosion. He didn't have time to aim a massive blast, nor the control for it. He needed precision. The robot's slow-motion fall had exposed its ankle joint, a complex tangle of hydraulics and wiring that was never meant to be a load-bearing surface. That was the weak point. Izuku pulled his arm back, the familiar, terrifying heat pooling in his palm. He thrust his hand forward. Crack bang! It was a sharp, focused blast, channeling all 10 seconds of power into a single, concussive point. It struck the ankle joint with surgical precision. Metal screamed and twisted. The joint shattered. The robot's fall was no longer a slow, forward topple. With its primary support gone, it crashed sideways, away from Uraraka, hitting the adjacent buildings with a cataclysmic boom that shook the entire city block. The world fell silent for a moment, the only sound the ringing in Izuku's ears. And then the klaxon blared, a deafening sound that signaled the end. Time's up! Izuku collapsed onto his hands and knees, every ounce of strength gone from his body. Adrenaline fled, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. He had done it. He had saved her. He looked at his hands. They were scraped and trembling. He had 1 point. He had failed the exam. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had been heroic, perhaps, but he hadn't been successful. The two were not the same. He had failed all might. In a dark, monitor-filled room high above the battle centers, a group of pro-heroes watched the final moments of the exam. "Did you see that kid?" One of them, Cementas, remarked, pointing at a screen focused on Izuku. "He hasn't stopped moving since the exam started. But his scores are abysmal. He only took out one robot himself," Midnight added, tapping her chin. "The rest of the time he was just interfering. Productively, I'll admit. But it's not exactly the kind of direct action we look for." Aizawa Shoda, a man who looked as tired as Izuku felt, leaned forward, his black eyes narrowed. "Look again," he said, his voice a low rasp. He rewound the footage. "Here," he pointed to Izuku saving the boy from the falling concrete. "That's Ida's engine Quirk. He's not as fast, not as controlled, but it's unmistakable." He skipped forward. "Here. He uses Kirishima's hardening to disable that one-pointer." He skipped again. "And here. A weak, but distracting, copy of Oyama's laser. He's not just interfering. He's using their quirks." A murmur went through the room. "A copy quirk? But they're so brief." He's vulnerable half the time. It's incredibly inefficient. Inefficient, perhaps? A cheerful voice piped up. A small, mouse-like creature in a suit, Principal Nizu, was watching the main screen with a gleam in his beady eyes. He had the footage of the zero-pointer encounter on a loop. But watch what he does. He assesses the situation. He identifies the most effective tool, the girl's own quirk. He uses it not to attack, but to change the fundamental nature of the problem. He turns a question of force into a question of balance. Then, during his cool-down period, while under immense pressure, he identifies a second tool and uses it to exploit the weakness he created. He never once tried to meet the obstacle with brute force. He dismantled it, piece by piece, with logic. Nizu took a sip of his tea. He scored 1 villain point. But heroism isn't just about defeating villains, is it? It's about helping others. A screen popped up showing a different point tally. That subtle pinging noise some of them heard? That was this. Examinee 7112, Izuku Midoriya. Villain points 1, rescue points 60. Aizawa allowed himself the smallest, faintest smirk. He's a problem solver, not a fighter. A force multiplier. Unpredictable, illogical, and utterly heroic. Nizu's smile widened. Indeed. I think he will be a most interesting addition to UA. The week following the UA entrance exam was a unique form of torture. It was a purgatory of silence, where every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind, sounded like the mail slot clicking open. Izuku went through the motions of his life, eating, sleeping, finishing his final assignments for middle school, but his mind was elsewhere, trapped in an endless loop of the final moments of the exam. The colossal robot, the cry for help, the frantic, ticking clock of his own quirk. He replayed his performance over and over, his inner analyst mercilessly dissecting every choice. 1 villain point. A single, solitary point. It was a pathetic score. He had saved the girl, Achiko Uraraka, but had that been the test? Or had he been a fool, chasing a noble but irrelevant objective while everyone else played the game correctly? He pictured All Might's face, not beaming with pride, but etched with disappointment. I'm sorry, Toshinori-san, he thought for the 100th time, staring at his scarred knuckles. I failed you. He was sitting at the dinner table, listlessly pushing a piece of fish around his plate, when his mother entered the room. She was holding a single, thick envelope, her hands trembling slightly. It was beige, sealed with the unmistakable red wax crest of UA High School. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. This was it. The verdict. His mother placed it on the table as if it were a live bomb. She looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and terror that mirrored his own. It's here, Izuku. He could only nod, his mouth suddenly dry as sandpaper. He picked up the envelope. It felt impossibly heavy. He retreated to his room, the All Might posters on his walls feeling like a jury of his heroes, their smiling faces judging him. He sat at his desk, staring at the seal. He could just leave it. He could live in this Schrodinger's moment forever, where he had both failed and succeeded. With a surge of desperate resolve, he tore it open. A small metal disc clattered onto his desk. A second later, it flickered to life, projecting a three-dimensional image into the air above it. It was All Might in his full, muscle-bound glory, standing in front of a UA backdrop. I am here! A projection! He boomed, his voice filling the small room. Izuku yelped, and fell backward out of his chair. Young Midoriya! All Might continued, unaware of his student's predicament. I know it has been a long week, but I am here with the results of your exam. You passed the written portion with flying colors, of course. Your analytical skills are top-notch. However, in the practical exam, you scored only 1 villain point. Izuku picked himself up, his heart sinking into his stomach. He had known it, but hearing it from his idol made it feel so much more final. And normally, All Might said, his tone grim, that would not be enough to pass. The room felt cold. Izuku's vision started to blur with tears. But that was not the only metric. All Might's voice suddenly exploded with cheer. He gestured dramatically to a screen that appeared beside him. It showed a replay of Izuku yanking the engine-legged boy out of the way of falling debris. The UA entrance exam is not just about crushing villains. A hero school that rejected someone for saving another's life would be no hero school at all. Another clip played, Izuku, using a pathetic glitter beam to distract a robot, allowing another student to score. That's why we have another, secret set of points. Rescue points. Awarded by a panel of judges for acts of pure, unadulterated heroism. The screen showed a scoreboard. Izuku's name was at the top. Izuku Midoriya, 60 rescue points. Your quick thinking, your selfless actions, your ability to assess a threat and protect your fellow examinees. That is the heart of a true hero. You saved that girl, young Midoriya, and in doing so, you passed with flying colors. All Might pointed directly at the camera, directly at Izuku. So come, young Midoriya. This is your hero academia. The projection flickered and died, leaving Izuku sitting on the floor, stunned into silence. He hadn't failed. The tears that came were not of sorrow, but of overwhelming, unbelievable relief. He had done it. He was going to UA. He had taken the first real step on the path his mentor had set for him. The first day at UA was even more intimidating than the entrance exam. The building itself was a monument to heroism, its sheer scale designed to inspire awe and humility. Izuku walked its halls, his heart a nervous hummingbird in his chest, searching for his classroom, Class 1A. The door was colossal, easily twice the height of a normal person, designed for accessibility for students with mutation-type quirks involving gigantification or non-standard body shapes, his mind supplied automatically. It was a thoughtful detail that only made him more nervous. He slid the massive door open and was met with a scene of barely contained chaos. His eyes immediately fell on two familiar figures. The first was the tall, formal boy with the engine legs, who was standing rigidly, his arms chopping the air in sharp, robotic motions. The second, his feet propped disrespectfully on his desk, was Katsuki Bakugo. Don't put your feet on the desk! The engine boy scolded, his voice sharp. Don't you think that's rude to the UA upperclassmen and the people who made the desk? Bakugo just sneered. Like I care. What middle school are you from, you extra? Izuku froze in the doorway, feeling like an intruder. He wanted to turn and walk away, but it was too late. The engine boy spotted him. He strode over, his movements stiff and precise. It's you, he announced. Good morning. I am from semi-private academy. My name is Tenya Ida. Oh, I'm Midoriya. Izuku stammered. It's nice to meet you, Midoriya-kun, Ida said, his expression intensely serious. I must apologize. During the exam, I misjudged you completely. You understood the true nature of the test, while I did not. I was blinded by the simple mechanics of point scoring. You, on the other hand, you are the superior student. Izuku was taken aback by his earnest intensity. Before he could respond, a cheerful voice piped up from behind him. Oh! It's you! The plain-looking one! He turned to see Achiko Uraraka, the girl he'd saved from the zero-pointer. She was beaming at him. You were so cool! That punch was amazing! Bam! She mimed a punch in the air. Huh? The punch? Izuku felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. The last thing he wanted was to draw attention to his patchwork use of quirks. His cover story, worked out with a paranoid Tashinori, was that his quirk was a simple, unpredictable energy burst. Vague enough to be plausible, common enough not to invite too much scrutiny. And you figured out the whole thing with the rescue points, right? She continued, her eyes sparkling. You're so smart. As they talked, Izuku felt a familiar, intense gaze burning into the side of his head. He glanced over at Bakugo. The sneer was gone from his rival's face, replaced by a look of pure, venomous confusion. His eyes narrowed, trying to solve a puzzle that made no sense. Deku. Useless, quirkless Deku. Here. In Class 1A. And they're talking about a punch? What punch? The air around Bakugo seemed to crackle with unspoken questions and simmering rage. If you're just here to make friends, you can pack up your things and leave. A new voice, low and profoundly tired, cut through the chatter. Everyone turned to the doorway. A man who looked like he hadn't slept in a decade was lying on the floor, zipped up in a yellow sleeping bag like a giant caterpillar. It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down. the man said, wriggling out of the sleeping bag and standing up. He was tall and gaunt, with long, unkempt black hair and dark, tired eyes. Time is a precious resource. You lot aren't rational enough. He took a slow sip from a juice pouch. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. A murmur of shock rippled through the class. This disheveled man was a pro-hero? Aizawa tossed a bundle of gym uniforms onto his desk. Put these on and meet me on the field. Now, the locker room was a cacophony of nervous energy as 20 students changed into their UA gym uniforms. Izuku kept to himself, his mind racing. Aizawa. He knew that name. Pro-hero, Eraserhead. Quirk, Erasure. He can temporarily erase the quirks of others just by looking at them. The effect stops when he blinks. Fights with a capture weapon and relies on stealth and hand-to-hand combat. A perfect counter-meta hero. An underground legend. The fact that a hero like that was their teacher sent a shiver of apprehension down his spine. On the training field, Aizawa looked over the assembled class with an air of profound boredom. Today, we're going to be conducting a quirk apprehension test. A quirk test? Several students exclaimed in unison. But what about orientation? And the welcoming ceremony? UA isn't a normal school, Aizawa said, his voice flat. We don't have time for pointless pleasantries. You're here to become heroes, and that training starts now. He turned his gaze to Bakugo. Bakugo, you finished first in the practical exam. What was your best score for the softball throw in middle school? Bakugo blinked then smirked. 67 meters, right. Aizawa tossed him a softball. Try it now with your quirk. Stand in that circle. Do whatever you need to, just don't leave the circle. Bakugo stretched his shoulders, a wicked grin spreading across his face. He wound up, his palm beginning to crackle. Die! He screamed, hurling the ball. A massive explosion propelled it forward, a deafening boom that sent a shockwave across the field. The ball soared, a tiny speck against the blue sky. Aizawa held up a device, which beeped. He showed the class the screen. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in excited chatter. 705 meters? Seriously? This looks so fun. Fun, you say? Aizawa's voice dropped, and the temperature of the field seemed to plummet with it. A dark, predatory smile spread across his face. You have 3 years here to become a hero. You think it's all going to be games and fun? Fine. How about this? The student who ranks last in total points across these 8 tests will be judged to have no potential, and will be expelled immediately. Panic. Pure, unadulterated panic swept through the class. Expelled? On the first day? This was insane. This is our school, Aizawa said, his hair beginning to float slightly as his eyes glowed a faint red. And I can run my class however I see fit. Welcome to the UA Hero course. Izuku's blood ran cold. Expelled? He was at an immediate, catastrophic disadvantage. His quirk wasn't like the others. He couldn't just apply it to a test. He couldn't use a hardening quirk on a long jump, or a zero-gravity quirk on a grip strength test. Each test would require a different tool, and he was surrounded by a sea of unfamiliar options. This wasn't a test of power. It was a test of his ability to improvise under the most extreme pressure he had ever faced. Test 1, 50-meter dash. Izuku was paired against Bakugo. A cruel twist of fate. As they lined up, Bakugo shot him a look that was pure poison. What's your game, Deku? He growled, his voice low. You think this is a joke? You're going to get crushed. Izuku didn't answer. His eyes were locked on Tenya Ida, who was in the first heat. He watched as Ida crouched, the engines in his calves roaring to life. The starting pistol fired, and Ida shot forward like a bullet, clearing the distance in 3.04 seconds. It was incredible. And it was exactly what Izuku needed to see. Now it was his turn. He took his place in the starting blocks. He could feel Bakugo's glare, Aizawa's analytical gaze, the eyes of the entire class on him. Objective, 50-meter dash. Tool, engine. Target, Tenya Ida. Cooldown plan, none needed. The test ends at the finish line. The starting pistol fired. In the same instant, Izuku activated Echo. Click. Power surged into his legs. He wasn't as practiced as Ida. He stumbled for a split second as he launched, his body not used to the sudden, immense thrust. Bakugo was already halfway down the track, propelling himself with controlled explosions. Izuku pushed, his legs pumping furiously, the copied power roaring. He closed the gap, the wind screaming past his ears. He crossed the finish line a fraction of a second after Bakugo. His time, 4.13 seconds. Respectable. Bakugo's, 4.09 seconds. Bakugo whirled on him, his eyes wide with disbelief. What the hell was that? He demanded. You were fast. Since when can you do that? Before Izuku could stammer out a reply, Aizawa called for the next group. Izuku quickly shuffled away, his heart pounding. He had survived the first test. But he had also put a massive target on his back. Test 2, grip strength. This was a disaster. There was no one in sight with an obvious strength-enhancing quirk. A boy with multiple arms was getting a high score, but that was a mutation, not a power he could copy. He squeezed the device with all his might, the months of physical training giving him a decent, but ultimately mundane, score of 58 kilograms. He watched a large, muscular boy with huge lips casually score 540 kilograms. He was already falling behind. The other tests were a mixed bag. He did poorly in the long jump, failing to find a suitable mobility quirk in time. He managed a decent score in the side-to-side steps by copying the quirk of a girl who could generate a slippery acid from her feet, allowing him to slide quickly back and forth. But with each test, he felt himself slipping further down the rankings. It all came down to the final event, the ball throw. He watched his classmates go one by one. Uraraka, with a gentle tap, made her ball weightless and scored an infinity symbol. The class was in awe. Ida strapped the ball to his foot and used his engines to launch it. Aoyama used his naval laser. Each student showcased the raw, direct power of their quirk. Then it was Bakugo's turn again. 705.2 meters. The benchmark. Finally, it was Izuku's turn. He walked to the circle, the soft ball feeling heavy in his hand. He had one chance. One throw. He couldn't just use one quirk. A strength quirk would give him a good score, but not a great one. An explosion quirk would be too obvious a copy of Bakugo's. He needed to think like his mentor had taught him. Innovate. Combine. You are not a hammer. His eyes scanned the field, his brain working at a fever pitch. He saw Uraraka, standing with the other girls. He saw Bakugo, watching him with a predatory intensity. A plan, insane and brilliant and terrifyingly complex, began to form in his mind. He stepped into the circle. He took a deep breath. Phase 1. Objective, negate weight. Tool, zero gravity. Target, Achiko Uraraka. He locked his gaze on her, on the memory of her quirk in action. Click. Seconds 1 to 10, he had her quirk. He didn't throw the ball. He simply touched it with all 5 fingers of his left hand. A faint pink glow enveloped the ball for a second, then faded. The ball in his hand was now utterly weightless. It was done. He had 9 seconds to spare, which he spent just standing there, breathing, calming his racing heart. The power vanished. Seconds 11 to 20, cool down. The class was murmuring. What was he doing? Why wasn't he throwing? Bakugo was scowling. What's the hold up, Deku? Scared? Aizawa's eyes were narrowed, watching him intently. Izuku ignored them all. He was counting in his head. 3, 2, 1. His gaze shifted. Phase 2. Objective, apply propulsive force. Tool, explosion. Target, Katsuki Bakugo. He focused on his rival, on the violent, concussive power he had used just moments ago. Click. Seconds 21 to 30. The heat bloomed in his right palm. The ball was still in his left hand, weightless. He brought his hands together, transferring the ball. He had 10 seconds. He wound up, mimicking Bakugo's throw, but with a critical difference. He wasn't aiming for raw power. He was aiming for a perfect launch vector. He threw the ball, and at the precise moment it left his fingertips, he unleashed a small, controlled blast from his palm, not a wild die. but a focused, propulsive whoosh. The weightless ball, propelled by the explosion, shot into the sky like a cannonball. It didn't arc. It just went, a white speck disappearing into the heavens. Silence. The entire class stared, mouths agape. Aizawa held up his device. It beeped. He turned it around. 705.3 meters. He had beaten Bakugo. By a tenth of a meter. What? Bakugo's roar was primal. He launched himself forward, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. DKU, you bastard! Tell me how you did that or you're dead! Before he could reach Izuku, a gray scarf shot out, wrapping around Bakugo and immobilizing him instantly. He struggled, but the capture weapon was like steel. Stand down, Aizawa said, his voice dangerously low, his eyes glowing red, his hair floating around his head. I'm getting dry-eyed just watching you people. He had erased Bakugo's quirk. He released Bakugo, who stood there trembling, not with fear, but with a fury so profound it was terrifying. His world had been turned upside down. The useless, quirkless Deku, the pebble he was meant to kick aside, had just demonstrated a power that seemed to rival his own. The rivalry, once a one-sided affair of bullying, had just ignited into something far more intense and volatile. Aizawa deactivated his quirk. We're done here. The results are on the screen. He gestured to a holographic leaderboard. Izuku scanned it frantically, his eyes searching for his name. He found it. Dead last, 20th place. His blood ran cold. He had done it. He had thrown the ball, but he had failed everything else. He was going to be expelled. All that work, for nothing. Oh, and by the way, Aizawa said, turning to walk away. That whole thing about expelling someone? That was a logical deception. The class stood in stunned silence. Then erupted. It was a lie? Of course it was. A girl with a large black ponytail, Momo Yayorozu, said calmly. It was a rational falsehood to bring out the best in us. Izuku didn't hear them. He was slumped over, the relief so intense it made him dizzy. He hadn't been expelled. He had survived. He had a long, long way to go, but he was still here. He was still a student at UA. Later, as they were walking back to the classroom, Ida and Uraraka caught up with him. Midoriya-kun, that was an incredible throw, Ida said, chopping his arm for emphasis. A truly ingenious combination of principles. Yeah. It was amazing, Uraraka added. What is your quirk anyway? It seems like you can do a lot of different things. Izuku stammered, falling back on his cover story. It's an E-energy burst. It's just really unstable and hard to control. Sometimes it comes out fast, sometimes it comes out hot. It was a weak explanation, but it was the best he had. They accepted it, their own excitement overriding any deep suspicion. But as they walked, Izuku felt that burning gaze on him again. He looked back. Bakugo was standing 20 feet behind them, alone, watching him. His expression wasn't angry anymore. It was cold. Calculating. The look of a predator that has just identified a new, inexplicable threat in its territory. He wasn't just mad that Deku had power. He was obsessed with what that power was. The days of simply dismissing him were over. From now on, every move Izuku made would be under the rival's scrutinizing, hateful gaze. The next day brought the first official heroics class. The students buzzed with excitement, wondering who their teacher would be. I am here! A familiar voice boomed. Walking through the door like a normal person, All Might burst into the room, clad not in his modern suit, but in his classic Silver Age costume. The class exploded with excitement. It was the #1 hero, in the flesh. Welcome to Hero Basic Training, All Might announced. For today's lesson, we're going to jump right into the deep end with Battle Training. He pressed a button, and numbered cases slid out from the wall. And for that, you'll need these. Your very own hero costumes, designed based on your quirk registration forms and your personal requests. The energy in the room was palpable. They grabbed their cases and headed for the changing rooms. Izuku's case was number 17. He opened it, his heart pounding. He had designed it himself, A simple but practical green jumpsuit with white gloves, a red belt, and a mask with long, ear-like protrusions and a grin-shaped respirator. It was a clear homage to his idol, a design that screamed All Might Jr. But his mother had tweaked it, seeing his simple drawings and pouring her own love and support into the final product. It was perfect. They emerged into the training ground, a dazzling array of unique costumes. All Might gave them a thumbs up. They say the clothes make the hero, ladies and gentlemen. And you all look the part. You look so cool. His eyes lingered on Izuku for a moment, and though his smile was for the whole class, Izuku saw the immense pride in his mentor's gaze. Now, for today's exercise, All Might explained. We'll be splitting you into teams of 2, heroes versus villains, for an indoor battle scenario. The villains will be guarding a nuclear weapon prop, and the heroes will have to either capture the villains with this capture tape, or secure the weapon within the time limit. The villains win if they protect the weapon or capture the heroes. He drew lots to determine the teams. Izuku was paired with Uraraka. He felt a wave of relief. He knew her quirk. He could work with her. Then All Might drew the opposing team. And your opponents will be Team D, consisting of Tenya Ida and Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku's blood ran cold. It was the worst possible matchup. Ida, with his speed and tactical mind, and Bakugo, who now had a very personal, very violent score to settle. This wasn't just a training exercise anymore. This was a reckoning. All Might looked at the matchup, a flicker of concern crossing his face before he masked it with his heroic smile. Team A, the heroes, will be Izuku Midoriya and Achiko Uraraka. Team D, the villains, will be Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Ida. Villains, you have 5 minutes to prepare inside the building. Heroes, you can form your strategy outside. The rest of you, come with me to the monitoring room. As Bakugo and Ida headed inside, Bakugo shot Izuku a look of pure, murderous intent. Get ready to lose, Deku. Uraraka turned to Izuku, her expression worried. Wow, this is intense. Bakugo seems to have a real grudge against you, Deku-kun. He's always been like that, Izuku said, his voice quiet. He was staring at the building, his mind already dissecting the problem. But he's not the only threat. Ida-kun is incredibly fast, and he's smart. He'll be guarding the weapon. Bakugo will come straight for me. It was a terrifying thought, but it was also a predictable one. And predictability was something he could use. So what's the plan? Uraraka asked, her trust in him absolute after the entrance exam. Izuku looked at her, then back at the building. A strategy was forming, a desperate gambit that hinged on 10-second windows and a perfect understanding of his opponent's rage. The plan, Izuku said, his voice low and steady, is to use his anger against him. We're not going to fight him. We're going to win.